The world is on fire economically, and it was all started by our president. I mean, you really want the uh, the bizarre death grip that Donald Trump has on bad ideas and now unfettered power with all of the guardrails off, no one to tell him, Mr. President, I think you should maybe modify these positions. We end up where we are. Um, I will give you a couple of pieces of video. Chaplain Fred says, "Good morning, Mark and Kim, and all who make the show work like clockwork. I guess Trump is a stable genius." So he says. I don't know. Small G on genius. Where is Mark Burnett? Asks Biggie61. You know, it's funny. Mark Burnett really made us, the TV viewing audience, believe that Donald Trump is a brilliant businessman, when the truth is he's a wildly failed businessman. He's virtually no business he's ever had has been successful. He's had 6 bankruptcies. And again, declaring bankruptcy in itself isn't a problem. But when you do it over and over and over, it's now you're a chronic bankruptcy declaration waiting to happen. And that's what happened with Donald Trump and his monies. He was in essentially gifted a fortune and then lost that fortune. And now he's making the fortune up on grift, of course. His biggest assets in the real estate business oftentimes were receptacles for money laundering through Russia. They bought entire floors of his hotels, of his buildings in New York, and overpaid for them. That's a classic way in which high-end real estate can be used to launder money. Russia, China does it as well. Let's though. So I'm just going to put that aside. But that was in response to the comment. Now, Tony, give us the latest from the White House, which is to threaten even more tariffs on top of the tariffs that have already been imposed on China.
We are following the breaking news of President Trump threatening to slap China with additional tariffs. Let's go live to CNN senior White House reporter Kevin Liptak. So, Kevin, what is the president saying about this potential escalation here?
Yeah, and it's a major escalation in this tit-for-tat tariff war between Washington and Beijing. Remember, Pam, last week President Trump applied that 35% reciprocal tariff on China. China retaliated, applying its own 34% tariff on the United States. Now President Trump saying this: if China does not withdraw its 34% increase above their already long-term trading abuses by tomorrow, April the 8th, the United States will impose additional tariffs on China of 50% effective April 9th. He goes on to say that additionally, all talks with China concerning their requested meetings with us will be terminated. And I just want to break down the math for you here, Pamela, because remember, President Trump had already applied a 20% tariff on China for its role in the fentanyl crisis. He applied that 34% reciprocal tariff last week. That goes into effect later this week. Now he's threatening this additional 50% retaliatory tariff on China, this tit for tat back and forth. That would bring the total tariffs on China by the United States to 104%, which is a huge number. China, the world's second largest economy, one of the United States' largest trading partners. This could have a serious effect for American consumers, given the amount of goods that come into the United States. And I think just as we have seen today, the market's clearly looking for some kind of off-ramp here, for some kind of easing on the part of the president. This shows that the president is very much committed to this tariff plan, exactly not what the markets were looking for, Pamela.
Yeah, thank you, Tony. That's great. I feel as though he's, of course, started something and he doesn't know how to end it. He doesn't feel compelled to end it. I can't even, we talked about this last week, see a coherent explanation for why this happened or even how it happened, meaning there is such chaos associated with even the methodology with which he comes up with these tariffs. And you'll hear some of that in the videos to come, that I struggle to see now it'll be used over and over, the off-ramp that everyone's looking for. You know, how do we get out of this? What is the end game? I think you struggle to find it because there is no coherence to this policy. What else do you have, Tony? Show me the. This is actually pretty good. I think this is the Economist, I believe. Who? Let's hear from her.
Over the weekend, China's foreign ministry saying that, quote, the market has spoken when it comes to President Trump's tariffs. And for more now on how China is responding, I want to bring in Mary Lovely, a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute for International Economics.
That's why this
Good
is
morning
important,
to you.
I think.
We're all trying to make sense of what may or may not happen here as these negotiations, if that's what they even are, play out. To the extent that you think that the Trump administration or the Chinese government has the better hand in terms of what happens next, and if there's an off-ramp, what do you think happens?
Well, we know that the first thing that happened was that the Chinese government decided to levy its own 34% tariffs on U.S. exports. So if there is going to be a negotiation, and the Chinese still hope there will be a negotiation, the president of China, Xi Jinping, wants to go to those negotiations with some ammo in hand. There has to be something to bargain with if there's going to be bargaining. So we're hoping that there's a deal somewhere here if you're concerned about what these mean for U.S. consumers and U.S. businesses. But it's not really clear. As far as we can tell, the Chinese have no understanding of what the Trump administration would accept in a deal. The Chinese are not sure what they'd be willing to give. So we're still very, very far away from a deal.
Mary, the thing that I can't understand is who has more leverage in all of this? Because as the markets here in the United States continue to drop, and that's not to say that they're not dropping, obviously, in Asia and around the world as well, but you have to imagine that there will be a tipping point where constituents of this administration and members of Congress and the House and the Senate start to say, no mas, we're not doing this. And so there is going to be a double pressure, I would imagine, on this administration to make a deal. The question is that double pressure, if you will, exist in China, or do they have more patience than we do?
Well, the Chinese, as we know, have been trying to revive their economy. They've had very weak domestic demand. They've been using both monetary stimulus and fiscal stimulus. They have more to give on the fiscal side, and they're already beginning to use it. Manufacturing is a significant share of their economy, but exports to the United States are not. It's less than 3% of GDP. That 3% does matter. There's a lot of softness, particularly in the factory sector, and that represents a lot of jobs. But China has already decided this is not where its future lies. It has been shedding jobs and so-called labor-intensive activities for years, and its plan is to continue. They want to move up the value chain, as we know, into higher tech type of manufacturing as well as services. So there are many Chinese who see this as inevitable, something they're going to do anyway. And they're right now behind their president in terms of not giving in to what they see as U.S. aggression.
So let me translate that. Thank you. That means that the Chinese have, as a government and as an economy, they have the leverage because, again, we're their biggest customer, but they're our biggest supplier. And when you see that it's only 3% of GDP, they don't care about giving it up. And I believe that Trump has got to get that memo. I don't think he'll get it because I don't think he reads memos to begin with. But this is the state of things. You get into an adversarial economic, I'm going to just call it pissing match with China, and you're going to lose. And when I say you're going to lose, I mean all of us are going to lose, so that everything that we buy will become more expensive, and the variety of things we buy will become more limited. So we already have begun to source a lot of the stuff that comes to America through Southeast Asia, India, Vietnam. I mentioned this to you last week. That's why the Vietnam thing made no sense to me, because they provide so much to this country in the way of everything from Nike tennis shoes to the sweaters you'll wear at Christmas. And yet they are being slapped with a 46% tariff because Trump doesn't really understand this balance of trade and trade deficit concept sufficiently. So he doesn't really put these deficits in the right category, in the right column. You know, he's seeing them as taxes, and they're not. So again, his economics is crazy. It's incoherent. And as I just run out the Vietnam thing, you'll never have Vietnam buying as much from America as we buy from them. I mentioned this to you last week because they're such a small country. How could they possibly do it? Even if they had the money, and by the way, they don't, because they make $70 a month. So they couldn't buy the stuff from the U.S. anyway. So this is utterly absurd.
Well, Trump is digging in his heels, and he did another post right before the stock markets opened this morning, and he invented a word. He said, "Don't be weak, don't be stupid, don't be a panikin," which is apparently a new party based on weak and stupid people. "Be strong, courageous, and patient, and greatness will be the result."
Yeah. Give me the next one, please, Tony. This speaks to the complete absurdity of the computation of these tariffs to begin with.
We're sitting there on the desk last night.
Yeah, economists can't make sense of it. Go ahead. I'll talk over it a little bit at times, but don't stop for me.
President Trump says we're charging people half of what they charge us. He puts up that, now I'm going to say, famous poster board. And I'm looking at those tariffs. I'm like, wait a second. I don't know the tariffs like an encyclopedia, but I'm pretty sure European tariffs are not 39%. I think I know that countries like Switzerland have like almost no tariffs, and Singapore. I think the European tariffs are like 4%. And like, where are these numbers coming from? I get offset and I start getting emails from the economists and the international trade experts I know. And they're like, what the heck are those numbers? And nobody really understood where those numbers came from. And I think David said, like at 5:30 or so, somebody who was not in the international trade community, because they couldn't understand it, started doing the math. And it is what Sarah was saying earlier. It's the trade deficit, half of the trade deficit divided by the imports. Now, let me show you a comment from the White House on where this came from. The White House official telling reporters yesterday, quote, "I want to emphasize here that these tariffs are customized to each country, and the numbers have been calculated by the Council of Economic Advisors using very, very well-established methodologies from the international trade economic literature." So then I started calling international trade economic experts, and nobody ever heard of this formula. Nobody has ever used this formula. So I'm sorry, but the conclusion seems to be the president kind of made this up as he went along. He made up. And I think what Sarah was saying was interesting. There was an anticipation, okay, it was going to be reciprocal. These are off the charts and nowhere near what other countries charge us. And unfortunately, it makes us into one of the highest, maybe the highest tariff country in at least the developed world, a lot like a lot of sort of developing countries.
Yeah. So there you go. That's the if you will, the pretzel logic associated with these tariffs. I just wanted to give you kind of around the horn the way things sit. I mean, you can obviously see the economic damage on Wall Street. You can see the economic damage in markets around the world. But as I mentioned to you Friday, the biggest price that will be paid will be right here in America. We will suffer. I'm talking about the markets. Okay? I'm not even talking about our lives. I'm not talking about the price of goods. I'm not talking about inflation, stagflation, anything. If you just care about the market, all you care about is Wall Street, your 401k, your retirement funds, etc. We will see our markets tank way worse than the rest of the world. We are going to pay a huge price. He just wants other leaders to beg and grovel. Ego in charge, says Karen T. I made this point last week. Trump likes pronouncements. He likes the show. He likes to be the boss. And he is essentially running kind of a mobster White House. So he wants world leaders to come to him, I think, as Karen correctly points out, and ask for favors, ask for exceptions. That is what's happening now. According to the White House, 50 world leaders called over the weekend to talk to Trump about exceptions. But, his buddy Netanyahu in Israel dropped all tariffs on the U.S., and they weren't even so bad to begin with. And still, Israel is being tariffed. So you're dealing with, a mercurial personality, and you don't know that any deal you make with him is going to last past the hour. 5 to 10 years for our markets to recover, says Lakameka. Yeah, it's I think it could be even longer to repair the reputation of America. I mean, I think there's a real cost here associated with the fact that America's word, our treaties that exist, our trade agreements that exist, they've really all been undermined by this. So there's a tremendous price we pay, and it will take more than 5 or 10 years to repair that reputation. There's a lot of reputational damage that Trump has done. And the last thing I will say economically is that he has deliberately weakened the dollar. So he wants to weaken the dollar, and this because that makes American goods cheaper. And so that helps in the back and forth of trade. But the weakening of the American dollar actually begins to undermine further America's strength in the world. So when you add reputation, weakening dollar, an economy that's dropping like a stone, you begin to see how America's place at the international table gets shrunk, and it can really do damage for the future. And I think you're looking at a timeline beyond a decade to repair that, if it's even something that you can repair. Patterson Thomas J says billionaires will get richer, but everyone else will suffer. Well, Donald Trump has the Billionaire Boys Club as his cabinet. They are almost to a person billionaires, and they were on the Sunday show circuit trying to explain this. I played you the Besant stuff on Friday where he's sort of mealy mouth, can't really, he's the Secretary of the Treasury. He can't really, he knows what's going on. Scott Besant knows what's happening. These people are not stupid, but they're so cowed by Trump that they just have to get out there and rah-rah. And Lutnick is perhaps the Department of Commerce head. He's perhaps the most embarrassing. Play me the last little bit, if you would, Tony, and then I'll get to Gary Dietrich.
So I would first say what's extraordinary is they really thought that Donald Trump was going to be great for the economy. They thought he was going to be great for markets. And so many of them were sort of blinded by this idea that, like,
CEOs, they're thinking that there's
so sick of the last 4 years spending so much time talking about diversity and DEI. I'm sick of being in a DEI war room talking about how we're going to improve things in our company. Well, now those same CEOs aren't in a DEI planning meeting. They're in a tariff war room day in and day out, and they're eating crow. And while they eat crow, they've lost the ability to even stand up and speak out. And I'll tell you, all of you, what's the most alarming, and it's certainly alarming to foreign leaders, is that no CEOs are standing up and speaking out. The fact that we're not hearing from any of them shows that democracy is lost. Why? Because Donald Trump will seek vengeance on them. So in the same way the legal industry had to bend the knee and people are looking at them and they're obviously saying barely anything, I'll ask Andrew. Andrew, what major CEOs, what bank leaders are on CNBC today walking through the impact of these tariffs? And I'm guessing you've got some, but not the biggest names in the markets because they're too afraid to speak, despite the fact that we're facing the biggest economic policy shift that could roil our markets and cause recession. How many of them are on CNBC speaking today?
You are 100% right. You're 100% right. I said you're 100% right. The only CEOs, the only executives that are prepared to speak out right now are people like a Bill Ackman, who is eating his own crow, and others who basically work for themselves. The big publicly traded CEO companies that are run by CEOs do not want to speak out. Will they get on the phone and say, this is crazy, Andrew? This is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs? Can you believe it? Are you going to say on TV that it's cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs? You should. And here we are. But they're not, because they are scared. They are fearful of what the repercussion on them is going to be. And that's a lot of what we saw, or what the president was doing in the first couple of weeks of his administration, that frankly scared them into being silent. That is actually a real fear. One other point I just want to make, because it's an important one. As this negotiation plays out, in a way, it's playing into the hands of our adversaries and of the folks that you would want to make a deal with if you could, which is to say that as I was talking with leaders and folks around some of the leaders of other countries this weekend, one of the things they say is, as the stock market in the United States continues to fall, it's going to actually put pressure on this administration, putting them in a better negotiating position. And some of them, by the way, are just waiting for the courts. Some of them are saying, let's just see how the U.S. courts deal with this first. Maybe Congress is going to deal with this. So it's not so clear that the longer this plays out, somehow the negotiating, the strength and the negotiating hand that the Trump administration has gets stronger. In fact, in many cases, it may get weaker.
Yeah, good stuff. Thank you. I think that is true. You know, as America takes on water economically, and as the roiling conversations around the economy begin to affect constituencies on the GOP side, I think you're finding other countries, I mean, in the international community, seeing a weakened America. That's a fair point. And this is leaving aside a lot of the other ways that America is being weakened at the moment. But we'll get to a lot of that. But I think that's a really good drill down in a fairly short time on where we are. It is a stubborn president who has come up with a twisted policy that no one can really explain, including his own people, that has led us to a place that will affect American life for the foreseeable future. It is interesting that the courts are pointed to because there are challenges in court, even by Charles Koch, about the tariff liberties that Trump has taken and the declaration of this emergency that's allowed him to pursue this tariff policy. Normally, a president wouldn't be allowed these kinds of broad, the breadth of judgment on tariffs, and then to impose that policy. He could come up with a policy decision, but then he would have to actually see Congress run it into a policy and applicability. Right now, we're seeing Trump basically take control, as he has everything else, under an emergency flag that he's flying that is being challenged in court, and it's even being challenged, but in a tepid way, in Congress. You know, a super smart guy is Fareed Zakaria, especially when it comes to international relations, and he was on this weekend as he is, and he made a couple of comments. I can't run all of it, but I wanted to run a little bit for you to give you a flavor for his take on it, because I think his take on it is so spot on, and some of it you'll recognize because we've been talking about it on the show, I think, since Trump has been taking power. But other stuff you might find really elucidative. Go ahead, Tony.
And yet, Donald Trump has been convinced that all these decades, as America has moved ahead, it is actually in steep decline. His worldview seems to have been set in the 1960s, when in his memory, America was a great manufacturing power. Another piece of that antique worldview is an overestimation of Moscow's power, which in his mind apparently remains a towering economic player on the world stage with whom he can do many important deals. Russia, bizarrely, has been excluded from any new tariffs. The reality of America as the dominant nation in the fastest growing and most critical spheres of the global economy today, technology and services, seems to mean nothing to him. His tariffs have been calculated using a method closer to voodoo than economics. Among many mistakes, they are based solely on U.S. trade deficits with countries in goods. That America runs huge surpluses in services, exporting software services, movies, music, law, and banking to the world, somehow doesn't count. More than 75% of the U.S. economy is apparently intangible fluff. Steel is the real deal. But while America is the world's dominant power, it is not so strong that it can act this irrationally. The world economy has grown of a size and scope that it will find ways around American protectionism, which is now among the world's most egregious. Contrary to Trump's stubborn beliefs, the U.S. was in fact already somewhat protectionist, with tariff and non-tariff trade barriers greater than in 68 other countries. Now, with these new tariffs, American protectionism is literally off the charts, with higher rates than the Smoot-Hawley ones of 1930 that exacerbated the Great Depression. In the short run, everyone will suffer. But in the medium to long run, countries will start trading around the United States. This movement has already begun. Since Trump won in 2016, the U.S. has abandoned virtually all efforts to expand trade. But other countries have picked up the slack. The European Union has signed 8 new trade deals, and China has signed 9. As Ruchir Sharma notes, of the 10 fastest growing trade corridors, 5 have one terminus in China. Only 2 have a terminus in the United States. Countries around the world need growth, and that means trade. China will clearly be the big winner in this new world economy because it will position itself as the new center of trade. Add to this Trump's hostility toward America's closest allies, and you will likely see Europe, Canada, and even some of America's Asian allies find a way to work with China. Donald Trump's nostalgic worldview is rooted even further back than the 1960s. He looks fondly on the late 19th century, when, as he described this week, the US had only tariffs and no income tax, and America was way stronger economically than it has ever been compared to the rest of the world. This history is nonsense. In 1900, the US was around 16% of the global economy by one measure. It is now about 26% of it. American standards of living and health are much higher today. But in acting out on his nostalgic fantasy, Donald Trump might well end up dragging America back to what it was then, a poorer country dominated by oligarchs and corruption, content to swagger around in its backyard and bully its neighbors, but marginal to the great currents of global economics and politics.
There you go. That's, I thought, was great. Some of it, again, we've discussed on the show for a while, but some of it I thought really sort of made the point in such a compelling fashion. He's really a brilliant guy. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.